beautiful downtown Lakeville. And when you leave here, please spend money in our downtown in one of our businesses, whether it's Lakeville Brewing or Angry Inch or Alibi. So there's plenty of places that'll take your money. We're going to start with prayer and a pledge, and then we'll kind of lay the groundwork for today's event. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you. My name is Lakeville, and I appreciate the opportunity to share an invocation for this morning. If I said Santa Fe, Texas, I know where your hearts would go. If I said Sutherland Springs, Texas, I know where your hearts would go. Las Vegas, Nevada, I know where your hearts would go. It appears this country needs a moral undergirding. In fact, Governor Abbott said, we turn to God. So as I reflect upon what I was asked to consider this morning, our forefathers knew well in advance that this country couldn't exist without a moral undergirding. It seems we've lost our foothold for morality. When Solomon was to be king of Israel, he reached out to the Lord and said, give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong. For who is able to govern this great people of yours? It's obvious we need a divine foothold in all of what we do in our lives, and in particular our government. 2 Chronicles 7:14 says, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray, and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven, and I will forgive their sin and will heal their land. It's in that heart that we should bow our hearts in prayer. Father, we thank you for this great country, for its founding fathers, and for the standards of which they had built it upon. We ask for forgiveness for those things which have deviated from such standards. And we pray that our leadership especially, but even in our own lives, we'd be examples for what you would have us live as free people. For as we have more and more entanglements in what is not our undergirding, that which comes from you, we lose our freedom. We ask you to bless this event. We're grateful for leadership that is provided for us in this community. We ask you to bless especially Jason Lewis, our upcoming elections. May we have a heart after you so that we would vote to bring a great nation to an even greater than it is now and forever. We ask this in your name. Amen.
Okay.
If you'd all rise, use your hats. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. The Pledge of Allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, sir. Well, I'm just going to kind of kick this off. I have a couple comments. I had the privilege to join the congressman this morning in Wabasha for the town hall there as well. And on my ride back, I couldn't help but think of something I wanted to share with everybody today. L.A. Stevenson was a Democrat, ran for president, lost Eisenhower. He was a U.S. ambassador, U.S. senator from Illinois. And after he lost the election, he gave a really impressive speech, but he ended it with this, that what unites us as Americans is far greater than what divides us by political party. So I'll ask you to keep that in mind today as we have a discussion with our congressman and ask questions and make comments. And the format will start where I'm going to line up on this side of the room. We'll have about 15 minutes for folks to just make comments. We ask you to limit it to 1 minute. If you go less than 1 minute, then it lets more people have the opportunity to have your comments heard. So I would appreciate that. Following that, the congressman will probably take some notes on some of your comments and may respond to some of those, and then we'll have a big opportunity to ask questions. There's a clear box in the back of the room, right at that table there. Ms. Smith is pointing to. Feel free to put your questions in there. Also, if you could have your name and contact information on there, so if we don't get to your question, the congressman will follow up with you directly. So please make sure you put your contact information on the card as well, otherwise we won't know who wrote it. And then we'll go through that, and hopefully your question gets answered. So with that, I'll start on this side, so if you want to get kind of in line, and we'll have this comment period. I've got my trusty iPhone stopwatch, just so you can kind of keep it in the side of your eyes so you stick within your time. So just hold on 1 second.
Representative Lewis, I'm Christine Norton from Cottage Grove. I thank you for having a town hall so that all of us have the opportunity to attend. And I thank you for allowing me to attend as one of your constituents. I would like to make a comment about the loss of health care coverage for millions of Americans that has occurred since the Trump administration began. And I don't really need the mic if it's going to keep cutting out. I'm a retired teacher, so I can hope you can hear my voice. I am very upset that millions of our fellow citizens are going without health insurance because Congress has voted to take away health care for them. I am very upset with some of the so-called solutions that are being proposed, such as short-term insurance plans that have very limited coverage, have high cost, and really are worthless. Representative Lewis has told me and others in his office last May that he supported high-risk pools and that they worked in Minnesota. I am here to tell you, and I have an article from Minnesota Public Radio to support me, that high-risk pools did not work in Minnesota. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll see. Hi, my name is Nancy Engel. I live in Rosemount, Minnesota, and thank you for letting me come here today. My comment is I am surprised by the number of empty seats here. If you look around at the number of empty seats here, there are dozens of people outside who would like to come in and talk to you. I don't understand why there's all these empty seats.
I think I got to be closer to the receiver.
Okay. Hi, my name is Christine Berglund. I'm a constituent in Egan, and actually, I'm going to reiterate because that was my comment too. I would just hope that you would be gracious enough to open the doors to people that want to be here, and if not, maybe perhaps make a comment as to why that's not appropriate.
I'm Jim Norton. I'm related to the previous Norton. I'm going to read from this because I'm really bad at this, and I don't want to take up time. But, there are many pressing issues clamoring for our attention, and we are passionately divided on not only how to approach them, but how to perceive them as well. I know I can't convince you of my point in the time allotted, but I would like you to consider this. The oceans are rising, 100-year floods occur every 20 years now, droughts are much more prevalent, forest fires are increasing in intensity and frequency like we've never seen before. 6 major hurricanes, 4 nor'easters in 3 weeks this past year, over $300 billion in damage this year alone. FEMA is stretched to its limits with no logical expectations of it getting better rather than worse. We can disagree on the cause, but the brunt of the effect is borne by the taxpayers. With $1 trillion annual deficit, how can we afford to continue to bail out communities who are predictably endangered rather than do what we can to mitigate the damages? How can you justify a farm bill that makes the poorest people jump through hoops in order to eat while asking the taxpayers to spend billions to rebuild in areas that are in serious jeopardy of being destroyed again without serious adjustments to their infrastructure?
Hi, Congressman.
Hi.
Welcome. My name is Natalie Cherney. I grew up in Farmington. Went to school, graduated, got a Fulbright to go to Germany. And I'm here today to ask you if my life matters. I'm asking because I am a woman of color. I want you to view me as a full person, not half, not just a woman, but as a full human being. I'm asking because I work with people with brain injuries. I'm worried about those cuts coming to Medicaid. Disability, not that far away from any of us. I'm also asking because I want to know why I can't make my own decisions on my body. I'm also asking if you believe that Black lives matter. I'm so serious because growing up, I was asked if I was adopted. The answer is no. But I don't feel safe in this country, not safe like a white man does. And I want to know, what are you doing to make sure that our schools are safer, that people do not fear going to school? What are you going to do to make sure that I get my rights? Thank you.
I'm Mary Lindell, and I'm from Cannon Falls, Minnesota, which is part of your rural district. I've been able to participate in one telephone town hall and had other ones where we could listen. This is the first time that we've actually seen you out in public with your constituents. My question has to do with the upcoming election. Are you planning on participating in public debates with Angie Craig and being available to the public?
Hi, Congressman. My name is Jim Kaufman. You might remember me from the meeting that we had last August. It was me and 4 other members of my indivisible group, and we had the conversation that we wanted, a civilized, mutually respectful conversation. I want to thank you for that publicly. Also, I wanted to say that one of my big concerns about America right now is we can't talk across the divide. We really need mutually civilized conversations like the kind we had. And finally, I'd like to say, I'd like to urge you to join with Eric Paulson in sponsoring H.R. 5717. It's a bipartisan bill that would authorize the Attorney General to make grants to states that have a red flag law. Minnesota does not currently have a red flag law. This is legislation that allows guns to be taken away from individuals deemed dangerous. I think the first one was in Indiana. It's named the Jay Blair law in that state after an officer who was killed in line of duty. Thank you very much.
Scott Young from Egan. I'd like to first thank you for doing what you said you were going to do when you said you would go to Congress, and that's cutting our taxes. Thank you very much. They were killing us. I'd also like to thank you for doing what you have done thus far to take care of Obamacare. That's still killing us. And,
No, it's saving lives.
Not mine.
Nobody yelled at you.
And so it needs to be gone. It is doing what it was designed to do, and that's wreck the healthcare industry in this country, and that's exactly what it's doing. It needs to go. We need to have free market solutions once again. I'd also like if you could pass on the thanks to Devin Nunes to keep doing what he's doing on the intelligence committees, uncovering what the FBI has been doing, and what business they have spying on the Trump administration. That's absolutely insane. So thank you. Keep up the good work. Appreciate it.
David Meyer, Egan, Senate District 51. I also want to thank you for the tax cuts. I think it's long overdue. I think it's really helped the economy. We're doing well now. We're over 4% growth in the last quarter. That's amazing. Also, someone said earlier about bridging the divide here. I'm a co-founder, co-chairman of Better Angels in Egan, and we've been working on trying to get this across the political divide. It's not about changing anyone's ideas necessarily or their thought processes. It's about explaining what it is that you think. And as long as you can stay and just explaining what you think and try and keep the emotion and make sure it's not a contest, it's just a conversation, you can get along pretty well. But really, thanks for the tax cuts, and I hope we can finish the work on healthcare. I think healthcare is broken. I think we need to bring back the high risk pools. They did work. They served the purpose, and also, more importantly, the high deductible policies for young people that they could actually afford, that just covered the catastrophic stuff. So if they had a hangnail, they paid for that out of pocket, but they can cover the big stuff themselves.
I'm George Johnson from Inwood Grove Heights, and I'm the only person of all my friends who applied for a ticket that got one. I know well over a dozen people who were denied tickets. I was the only one who got one from the group of people I know. They were told this venue was full. I'm seeing tons of extra space in here. You could easily fit 100, maybe even 200 more people in here. I think it is shameful that they were told this venue was full when it is clearly not. I think think you have an obligation to schedule another town hall with guaranteed access for everyone who is denied access to this one. It is not a town hall, it is a hand-picked audience, and there are people outside who want to get in, they should be let in right now. Thank you.
We're going to cut it off at the end here, so we'll just let these three go and then we'll move on to questions.
Hi, my name is Dennis Karstens. I'm from Eagan, Minnesota. As for the people out there, I actually spent 15 to 20 minutes out there trying to discuss some things with them. Believe me, based on what I saw, the last thing that bunch wants is to come in here and have a civil conversation. They want to come in here, scream, yell, disrupt, shout down anybody that disagrees with them. So my recommendation is, if you want to go out there and talk to them, go right ahead. Go ahead. But I don't want, if you bring them in here, I'm leaving because there'd be no point to this meeting. Thank you for having us.
I am Joseph Platoon from Eagan, Minnesota. I just wanted to thank you for your work on two issues that I think actually cross party lines. One of them is pushing back on the warrantless surveillance, some of the FISA stuff, and the other one is supporting states' rights when it comes to medical marijuana.
Pickard, Hastings, Minnesota. Just a couple of comments. One, when I was out there, I was approached by one of the people that you wanted to come in here, and she did nothing but try to provoke. So as a woman, somebody else was saying, well, they want to be viewed and respected. To me, any person, man or woman, if you want to be respected, you have to be respectful. And the one thing that I want to know is, why can't we abolish the Department of Education, because they seem to just be a voice box with the left right now.
Well, I will be remiss, I forgot to recognize two folks, Jake Orders from the Farmington School Board, and Lakeville Mayor Doug Anderson is also here. So we're going to turn this over, and the Congressman's going to make a couple of remarks, and then we will tackle the questions. The last thing I forgot to mention was, if the topic is the same question, I will set it aside. I'm not skipping over questions, but I will announce that this is the topic, and we're moving to the next ones. Thank you.
Thank you, Luke. Appreciate it. Can everybody hear me here? That work? Yeah. All right. Thanks so much for all of you for coming, whether you agree or disagree. That's the point. That's why I met with 271 groups, many of whom I'm glad today who disagree with me said they were in my office talking to me. Well, they have that access, and I've been glad to meet with them. We've had 7 employee town halls, we've had 19 telephone town halls, and we're glad to do this. Now let me tell you about the rules so everybody understands. Unfortunately, it seems to be a sign of the times that some people get a little bit too passionate. In fact, downright violent. We saw what happened to a fellow I served with a year ago, Representative Scalise. We saw what happened to Rand Paul. We saw what happened to David Kustoff, who had a town hall in Tennessee and was run off the road by people who just wanted to cause some serious problems. So we had to come up with a rule, and unfortunately we had a threat here last week when we announced these town halls. So we talked with Capitol Police and came up with a protocol and rules on how we could conduct this so that everybody in here was safe and everybody in here got a chance to talk. So what we did is we simply said, apply for a ticket online and you will be able to get that ticket. Everybody in the 2nd District got a chance to apply for a ticket online. Everybody. Some people applied, got the ticket, and apparently didn't show up because we had some 700 applications. There's no reason anybody that had a ticket to fill the seats available here is not here. We didn't keep anybody out. If they bought the ticket and they were on the list to come in, no one kept them out. So they didn't show. There's nothing I can do about that. I wish they would have. I wish everybody would have shown. But that does mean, because of protocol, some people that didn't get the ticket, didn't apply, or went past the deadline, didn't get in. Maybe they're outside, or maybe those people just wanted to come and make their views heard on the sidewalk. That's fine too. But I wanted to explain why we had to do this, and why we wanted to make certain this town hall was safe for everybody, most importantly you. And that's why we had the rules we did. Some of the issues here that you brought up are exactly why we're doing these town halls. And I know healthcare came up, but before we get to that, let's talk a little bit about what happened yesterday in Texas. Here we go again. Another tragedy, another shooting. This is something that everybody cares about. They talk about breaching the divide. Everybody cares about this and getting something done. The litmus test is, what are you going to do that works? Sloganeering isn't going to keep our kids safe. Passing another law may or may not keep our kids safe. In fact, yesterday, as we know, the perpetrator got a .38 revolver and a shotgun from his parents, who should have had the guns locked up. Had the weapon, that wouldn't be banned. Bump stock had nothing to do with that. High capacity magazine had nothing to do with that. AR-15 or a gun show loophole had nothing to do with that. All of the laws that have been proposed that would have been passed wouldn't have stopped the perpetrator yesterday. In fact, Nicholas Cruz in Parkland, same thing applied. He didn't buy it at a gun show. Loopholes wouldn't apply. He didn't have a bump stock. He didn't have a high capacity magazine. We've seen attacks at schools with knives, with devices. We've seen vehicle attacks. There is something deeper and more problematic with the violence in America right now. And I don't care whether it's violence at school or somebody getting in a car and mowing down people in Toronto. Something is amiss, and we need a serious national conversation about it. And I would love to have that. Now, I do think, as it comes to our kids, and one of the reasons I supported the Stop School Violence Act is to get grant money to harden the target. I want to do something. I mean, this is the fundamental question, folks. If what you propose is going to work or is it not? So are more school resource officers a better option or another law? I think more school resource officers are, and so Stop the School Violence Act has grant money in there for smart technology, hardening up the vestibules, and you know what? This may not be the right thing to say or politically correct thing to say, but if it means metal detectors in schools, we need to put metal detectors in schools. The fact of the matter is we protect adults better at airports than we do our kids in school. Now that's something we can do much quicker. You can have a much greater effect in protecting our kids than simply passing another law that may or may not get implemented, may or may not work. Look what happened in Parkland, for crying out loud. 35 times Mr. Cruz was sent to the authorities. They came out, they intervened, or they didn't intervene. The FBI couldn't track a YouTube video where he says he wants to be a school shooter. All of those laws were in place. In fact, the red flag laws that said clearly this fellow shouldn't have had a weapon and he should have been, quite frankly, getting better treatment, none of that happened. So I would just encourage everybody to ask themselves this fundamental question. Gun ownership in America, as far as the number of guns in homes, is way down from 2, 3, 4 decades ago. The level's way down. And yet, we're seeing more of these mass shootings. There's something beyond the weaponry or the device. It's a problem with our kids. And I don't have a good answer for that. Is it violent video games? Is it psychotropic medication? Is it the fact that we just don't have stable homes? You know, the one common denominator in a number of these shootings, fatherless boys. But those issues aren't easy to answer. They aren't equipped for a 30-second soundbite. That's going to have something, we're all going to have to work at that. That's going to take something that's going to take some time. No one, I've got 2 girls who are school age. No one's more concerned about this than I am. Nobody wants this to happen. We all want to fix the problem. But we don't want to do something that's window dressing and have it happen again. And in the meantime, as Justice John Paul Stevens says, you disarm law-abiding citizens and take away the Second Amendment, which I am not in favor of. So, I think everybody in this room is sincere on that issue. I really do. But I think there's disagreements on how we get there. But we all need to keep working on it. And I pledge to do that. Now, as to health care, you know, when the Affordable Care Act was passed, there were 3 fundamental promises. That 1, you'd have universal care. 2, your premiums would be lower. And 3, if you like your plan, you can keep it. Now, it's true. We tried to pass the American Health Care Act in the 115th Congress. It didn't make it. The folks that wanted to preserve the status quo prevailed. Senator McCain said this, and then he said that, and it didn't pass. All that is true. But what that means is, we're left with the system that the previous administration gave us. We're not left with the Republican alternative. We're left with the Affordable Care Act. The Minnesota Department of Health last month said another 116,000 people lost their health insurance in Minnesota. That's 350,000 people in Minnesota under the Affordable Care Act and MNsure that have lost their insurance. Insurance companies are dropping out of the exchanges. 40% of the country has one insurer. This fall, you're going to see your premiums go up. Somebody mentioned catastrophic coverage. My parents used to buy something called major medical. What that meant was you would have low deductibles, low copays for a catastrophic event that could bankrupt a family. The Affordable Care Act said, no, let's cover everything. Let's cover everything. Let's take Johnny and Susie to get their football physical, soccer physical. I want that covered, $1. They had 10 essential wellness benefits, which spawned 1,400 rules from Kathleen Sebelius. They put on mandate after mandate. You know what happened to premiums? They skyrocketed. Now, why do you think there was a mandate that you have to buy insurance under the Affordable Care Act? Because they knew nobody would buy it at those prices unless they put a mandate on there. There's got to be, and by the way, what happened was young people who were faced with a $650 penalty said, well, let's see. I can wait till I get sick to buy insurance and just pay the penalty now, or I can buy insurance now and pay $12,000 a year. The young people said, I'll pay the penalty. I'll wait. So they dropped out of the insurance pools. The traditional insurance model was turned on its head. And who was left in the insurance pool? The infirm, the sick, the elderly. That's called the death spiral, and that's why these premiums keep going up to the tune of the state Minnesota legislature, I should say, had to bail out MNsure $500 million. We're going to do that every 2 years? This system is totally dysfunctional, what we have here. It's totally dysfunctional. It's not going to work. And this fall, you're going to see it again. The American Health Care Act, which we tried to pass, kept pre-existing conditions covered, kept dependents on health care until they're 26. You know what it did? It said if you're young and you're healthy and you're doing the right thing, you can buy the kind of insurance you want. It might be a catastrophic policy. It might even be short-term. But you're going to buy the kind of insurance you want, not the kind that some federal bureaucrat says you have to have or you pay a penalty. Now, the beauty of that, above and beyond personal choice, the beauty of that is it encourages more young and healthy people to get into the insurance pool to subsidize the old and the sick. You know, the insurance model pools risk. You got to have people paying in who aren't getting sick to cover the people who are. But it's also got to be allowed to price risk. My college-age daughter pays well, she doesn't pay car insurance, I pay the car insurance, but it's a lot higher for her than it is for me. Why do you suppose that is? There's a track record of young people not driving as well or safely. So they raise those to encourage better behavior. By undoing the price controls on the Affordable Care Act, which we tried to do in our bill, it would have allowed the markets to drop prices for young and healthy to encourage them back into the market. Now, I just disagree on the high-risk pools. I think the Minnesota Comprehensive Plan did a much better job than what we've got now. And by the way, the Upton Amendment threw in another $8 billion on top of the billions we had in the original bill for those invisible high-risk pools. I think that's a better way to go and get more people, young people, to buy insurance they want. Most importantly in this bill, you want to talk about pre-existing conditions, which is really important. I think the genesis of much of that is job lock in our tax code. So let's say you work for 3M for 25 years. Or you're working for Blue Cross right here in the 2nd District for 25 years. You go in as a 25-year-old, you're healthy as an ox. You pay those premiums, you're fine, you're fine, you're fine. All of a sudden, you're 19 and you get in your 50s and you have all sorts of ailments. You get diabetes. Then you lose your job. What happens? You lose your insurance. Now you go to Cobra, and under Kennedy Kassenbaum, you got to pay that high Cobra cost. And if you go 63 days without paying that, the next employer can actually deny you coverage. So what did we do to fix that? We said, why should corporations and employers be the only ones to get a tax cut for providing insurance? They get to provide insurance to employees and they deduct it. Right? The employee gets the insurance and they don't pay taxes on it. That's the biggest single tax loophole. It costs about $275 billion. Nobody was talking about taking that away, but what we did in our plan was say, if you buy on the individual market and you buy an insurance product that you can't quite afford, we will give you a refundable tax credit so you can buy insurance like you buy automobile insurance, life insurance, homeowners insurance. So if you lose your job, guess what you do? You take your insurance with you. You don't lose your insurance. That is how the pre-existing problem came about. Now, there are other exceptions where young people have problems right from the get-go, but the majority of it is people in mid to late life lose their job and lose their insurance, and now they can't get coverage. I think that's a better way. I think equalizing the tax treatment was a better way. I think undoing the price controls and allowing people choice was a better way. But I'm just here to tell you, the defenders of the status quo prevailed on that one, and we didn't get our bill passed. So what we've got is the Affordable Care Act. We still need to fix that. I hope we can come together. I mean, people say, well, what are you going to do to help people? Well, if you undo the insurance exchanges. We had a refundable credit in our bill. You go out, you undo the exchange, but you go back into the insurance market like we had before. Go to an agent, buy a plan. If you couldn't afford it, the refundable credit made up the difference. So look, I don't want to monopolize on health care, but I know that's of concern to a lot of people, and I wanted to address it and have an honest dialogue, because I know some of you don't agree with me, and you won't. But I'm just saying that was, in my view, a better plan than what we have. Let me quickly introduce a couple of staff members, and then we'll go to the Q&A. Want to do that? Amy Smith is my chief of staff. She's there in the lovely big sweater. Amy's done a great job navigating the swamp for us. Catherine Bloodgood is our legislative director. She doesn't look like a veteran of Capitol Hill, but she is, and she does a great job. We've got Angela back here in the district office. Angela. Debbie, the gatekeeper. She's our scheduler and doing an extra duty here. Debbie, thank you so much. Cynthia, back here, she does casework. By the way, that's very, very important. We've had a number of people, and some of the groups, people came in to me and said, I can't stand you, Jason. I wouldn't vote for you if you're the last person on earth. But listen, I need some help with this federal bureaucracy. And we were more than happy to do it because that is our job. And Cynthia's done a fantastic job. She was with Representative Klein. Thank you. And I think that's everybody, isn't it? Is one of our great interns here, Jesse, maybe? And of course, Jack. I forgot Jack, our district manager. So, I wrote down some of the other comments. If they don't come up in the questions, let's leave time at the end so I can address what you all said. Okay?
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Is this on? It is okay. I'll talk loud. Well, okay. You can talk louder than I can. So this question is from Darren. It says, do you support exceptions to trade violation sanctions for companies like ZTE, such as been suggested via tweet, I assume a tweet from the president?
Can you hear me? I do have a problem with exemptions for companies like ZTE. There's a national security threat with that. And I do believe that if we're going to impose some border tariffs, we cannot play winners and losers. They've got to be uniform. And frankly, I didn't think the border adjustment tax was a really horrible idea if we could do that at the border and then lower your taxes in here. That didn't quite make it in the final bill, but I was certainly open to that. I do think we've got to get free and fair trade. Now look, agriculture is very, very important to Minnesota. Half of the soybean market goes to China. About 25 million bushels. Half of that goes to China. So we've got to be very cognizant. I met with the Mexican ambassador many, many times in the last few months, trying to make certain we finally get a deal on NAFTA. But the president's view, and I tend to agree with this, is I'm going to start here, and we're going to start tough to get to here, to get to compromise. And so we all want open trade, especially for our ag markets, but we also want free trade.
Okay. This question was about gun control that I think, if you felt adequately, did you address that, but we can talk about it again. It's up to you.
Well, I would just mention two things. I voted for Fix Nix, and a lot of people on my right side didn't like that. But the Fix Nix would say, remember the Texas shooting tragically where you had the Air Force fellow who was abusing his spouse at home and elsewhere, and he passed the background check, got a gun. The Air Force did not report to the authorities that this guy was a problem. So the Fix Nix bill, ironically in the concealed carry bill, said, no, the Attorney General needs a report from all of the federal branches to say, are you getting this information to the FBI for the background check? I voted for that. I think that's reasonable. I think that's important. I also voted for the Stop School Violence Act. I do believe that hardening the target is a better approach to solve this problem for our kids right now, and we can debate the other laws later. But I've got to be honest, and I like to think of nothing if not honest. If in fact you're asking me if I agree with Justice John Paul Stevens that we ought to repeal the Second Amendment, the answer is no. The Supreme Court ruled the Second Amendment is an individual right under Heller and McDonald. And we, I'm going to tell you where I do agree with you. Nicholas Cruz, or is it Christoph? It was Cruz, wasn't it? He, in part, should have never had a weapon. I couldn't agree more, he should have never had a weapon. But under the previous administration, there was a rule under the red flag guys that said a senior citizen who could not do their own bills, i.e. they hired somebody to pay their bills, would be deemed incompetent to exercise their Second Amendment rights under a red flag. I do not agree with that. So I think there's solutions we can work on. Let's start with hardening our schools as they become targets.
Okay, this question was about the open seats. I think that was adequately addressed. I'm going to move on to the next one. Open seats in the room, not anywhere else. This question is from David in Egan. Would you support a return to zero-based budgeting on the federal level? If so, would you be willing to co-sponsor or introduce a bill?
There's a graph back here by govtrack.com. It's available online. It's called govtrack.com. And it ranks members as to the bills they co-sponsor and author. We've seen a lot of people ranking people on their voting records. And one of the reasons I'm ranked smack dab in the middle on there, in the ideology score, is because on things like breaking the budget caps, the Budget Control Act, the bipartisan budget bill that passed recently, the two omnibus bills, one in 17, one this year, things like arming probation officers with weapons, things like voting on FISA to allow under national security warrantless wiretaps. I got whipped pretty hard on those from the Republican leadership. You know what I did? On all of them, I voted no. I voted no because I don't think it's the right thing to do. And I authored an amendment in Budget Committee, or not an amendment actually, I authored a bill, but it never got out, unfortunately, to audit the Defense Department. We've got, and you're supposed to be, I'm a pro-defense Republican, right? We got 800,000 civilian employees at the Pentagon. Not 8,000, not 80,000, 800,000. Nobody knows what they do. The Pentagon itself says we're not certain if we can do an audit because we don't know what's auditable and what's not. We've got a huge procurement problem. You've got waste with TRICARE. There's a base closing commission that we ought to be looking at so we don't build bases just for political gratification. That was shut down. I voted to reopen it and reinstall BRAC. So as I said during, quite frankly, 2 years ago, shared sacrifice on the part of some is raising somebody else's taxes. Usually your name. We need shared sacrifice. Got to get into a balanced budget. Let's raise your taxes. My idea of shared sacrifice is we look at this federal budget that is totally out of control and we cut across the board. We have Republicans going to Washington saying, let's cut Democrat programs. Then we have Democrats going to Washington and let's say, let's cut Republican programs. And then when both of them know that doesn't work, you know what they do? Let's fund them both. And then you end up with a $1.3 trillion omnibus bill. And I voted no on that, so I do have these grave concerns over the entire budget process. And until we don't have a revenue problem. The first 4 months of this year set a record for federal revenues. The CBO was off in its projection for April by $40 billion. We had more revenue by $40 billion in April than the CBO projected. We do not have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem, and we have a spending problem on Republican and Democrat programs.
Nobody put their name on this question, but it says the state demographer has made it clear that Minnesota is heading very quickly toward conditions in which the labor force and taxes cannot support government services. The number of retirees outnumber those entering the workforce. Minnesotans are leaving the state for jobs elsewhere, and farms are being sold. What is your plan to ensure Minnesota can attract jobs that'll bring new residents and support growth in the state?
No, I'm not running for governor. I don't plan to. That's a Minnesota issue. My plan is to return as much power to Minnesota as possible and let you folks fight it out. That's my job. My job at the federal level is not to micromanage Minnesota, which, by the way, is why I think the Met Council ought to have a local elected official on its board. Minnesota has to decide what kind of state it wants to be. It's obviously where my mother was born, raised, and died. She's buried out of Fort Snelling. This is my home where I raised my family. I love Minnesota. but we have got to do better when it comes to attracting capital. And one of the provisions we did in the Tax Cut and Jobs Act was to make the competition between states more visible to people. A massive $1 trillion loophole that allowed wealthy people from New York, California, yes, and some in Minnesota to deduct state and local taxes meant everybody in this room, unless you're really wealthy, had to pay more. That wasn't right. In order to get the rates down for everybody, we took away that loophole. And I will tell you, to be perfectly honest, I heard from a lot of wealthy Republicans, not a lot, but a few wealthy Republicans said, "What are you doing? You're going to raise my taxes." And I say, well, 95% of the people are actually going to get a tax cut with lower rates, a doubling of the standard deduction, a doubling of the child care credit, and I want a broad-based tax reform with fewer loopholes. That was the right thing to do. And now Minnesota has the chance to conform with that law or to keep taxing its citizens. Now, again, it's not my job to tell them what to do. It's my preference that they conform with the federal tax law.
All right, this question is from Sharon. It says, what can be done to combat the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency?
Well, I mean, we have to make certain, look, we are blessed. I'm driving through the district with the staff today. We're driving by Lake Pepin. By the way, I'm working with a group down there to make certain that we get the right sort of drainage in Lake Pepin to make it environmentally sound and have people enjoy it down there. We've got to make certain that we preserve the lakes and the waters that we all love. My staff is looking out here going, this is great, this is beautiful out here. Yeah, we think it's pretty cool too. We've got to make certain we do that. But you can't preserve any environmental asset you have if you don't have money. That's how you preserve it. The dirtiest countries around the globe are the poorest countries around the globe. So to put environmental protections in place, the first thing you have to have is a growing economy. That's no way to afford environmental regulations. And so that's one of the reasons we wanted to get the economy going. I do disagree with those who don't seem to care about livelihoods of other people, say, working at Pine Bend Refinery. The state's largest refinery is right here in our district at Pine Bend. The Clean Power Plan, which thankfully is moribund, if not dead for now, would have been a $500 million tax directly on those folks. And again, I want to be entirely straightforward with you. The best way to ship oil, the most efficient and the safest way is by pipeline. It is not by truck and it is not by rail. The Pine Bend Refinery out there gets all of its crude from pipeline. They need to get Enbridge done to get the pipeline there, which will allow more efficiency. And 88% of the aviation jet fuel at MSP is provided by our refinery in our district. So I guess what I'm saying is, nobody wants more environmental stewardship than I do, but I'm not going to threaten the economic risk or the livelihood of a very successful enterprise out there.
This question is from Nancy from Rosemont. It's another question about gun safety. I think we've adequately addressed that.
I don't think so.
What will you do?
Ma'am, I'll read the question. Just please. Every time you. Okay. Just a few days ago, a beautiful 7-year-old child lost his life because he found a loaded handgun that was stored in a hoverboard box. This death was 100% preventable had the adults in this home had understood basic gun safety protocol. Why do we not require all gun owners to take at least 1 hour of instruction in gun safety?
A lot of this is left to the states. For instance, the 21-year-old age. Some states have 21. Minnesota, we don't. We actually go down with an adult, I believe, to 16 in our hunting culture. I couldn't agree more that everybody ought to know how to use a firearm and ought to have a training system. But the problem with some of these laws is that it doesn't ensure that people will do them. One of the reasons... Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah.
I know that argument. My husband's a hunter, my son's a hunter, my son is on the track team. I'm not anti-gun, I'm really not. I am pro-gun safety. This 7-year-old boy is gone because his parents or whomever is...
Yep, it's tragic.
I understand that argument. Well, there's laws, but people are going to break laws. If you really feel that way, then we shouldn't have laws for anything.
No. Okay, no, that's fine. Let her finish. That's a fair point.
I just want some funding or something, some sort of public education about how to store your gun safely. Because those school massacres that happened in Newtown and the other, I don't want to mention.
Well, the one in Texas came from parents.
Now, there are laws already on the books that would allow the criminal authorities to prosecute families for child abuse. Those laws are already there. There are civil laws that will allow somebody to file a tort in some cases. All I'm saying is, if you start to penalize parents on this, where is it going to stop? There are lots of manners where people allow children to eat, super gulps or whatever the case might be, junk food. Are you going to go in and say that we're going to take over and tell you what you have to do?
I'm not. You're equating a human life with a super gulp? Are you kidding me?
No, I'm not equating that at all. I'm equating that there are a lot of children that don't have proper supervision, many of whom die.
Yeah, this kid killed himself. Other kids kill other kids.
Yep. I'll give you, okay. No, look, we disagree, but I'll give you an example of where I'm coming from. In Chicago, there were some 500 murders last year. 97% were those who were illegally obtained handguns on the black market. 3% were done with legally obtained guns, following the law. What I'm saying is, just passing another law is not going to ensure those tragedies stop. And I wish it would. But that's all I'm saying. But I don't disagree with you, and maybe there's some incentives we could do or put in place to encourage it. Right. And then people should store their guns. I think everybody agrees on that. And so does the NRA, by the way. Fair point.
This question's from Jim from Burnsville. Our nation is so bitterly divided and we're uncivil to each other. What will you do to improve the tone of public discourse?
Well, we certainly are divided, aren't we? And that's a shame. But there's nothing wrong with being divided, and there's nothing wrong with passionate people on the right, the left, in between, whatever. I applaud everybody that gets involved in civic life. Free speech for everybody, violence for none. That needs to be what we focus on. There's been way too much of the latter lately, coming from all sides, and no one has a monopoly on this particular problem. There are too darn many threats on the right and the left. There's too much violence. There's too much, literally, you deter so many good people from going into public service, going into elected office, because I'm not going to, let me say this first time. I'm speculating entirely here, but I've heard it more than once. We have a record number of House members resigning this year. It is not because they think they're not going to keep the majority. The generic ballots are actually coming in pretty tight. It's going to be another tight election. It's because, according to one person I talked to, they're afraid. Now, that's not as it should be in a free country. And again, one of the reasons we have these rules today is that we were taking advice from the authorities, from the Capitol Police, on how to conduct a town hall to avoid what's happened in the past. So, again, I want to make sure everybody, including the protesters out there, including people that call my office and say you're a rotten guy, has the right to express their opinion and to make certain they have that free speech opportunity. Free speech for everybody, violence for none. The only thing I will say, and this goes to some of my critics, I do have an obligation to listen to everybody. Whether they voted for me, whether they like what I'm doing, whether they don't. I do not have an obligation to agree with them. People say, how come you're not impeaching Donald Trump? Donald Trump won the 2nd district. By 1%. It wasn't a mandate, but he won. So when a bunch of Republicans went to the White House in Obama's 2nd term, and they said, you're not working with us. You need to do this and you need to do this. You know what President Obama said? Elections have consequences. Get up there and fight the next time. And that's what self-government is. So I appreciate all of you being here. I appreciate everybody. But I think sometimes we can pipe it down a little bit and have a dialogue like I just had with you and get things done. Or maybe we just walk away and agree to disagree, but at least we're talking.
Okay. This question is from Jeff from Egan. It's Congressman Lewis, what's the best way, in your opinion, to lower the overall debt of the United States government?
Yeah, right. Well, as I mentioned a moment ago, the real problem is the easiest way to get along in Washington is to start scratching your neighbor's back, because they inevitably will scratch yours. And that is a huge problem. I think at some point we need people with the courage of their convictions to stand up and say, I don't care if it's a Republican program, vote no. Frankly, I did that in 3 or 4 spending cases. The budget caps which, by the way, apply to defense. So, I'm sitting there in the conference on a daily basis, or not daily basis, but weekly basis. And I was asked once, right after I got elected, do you want to go in that Republican conference and get in the middle of that fight between the defense hawks and the budget hawks? Now, I'm in the conference for a couple months, and I think, when did the budget hawks get to talk? There is a problem in Washington of all of them like spending. It's just a matter of what you're going to spend it on. Republicans like their big government programs, and Democrats like their big government programs. None of us. So let me just give you an example. If I were to say, look, we got to cut the social safety net, and you say, oh, no, we're not kicking poor people off public assistance, that's wrong. And I say to you, tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to cut the Defense Department, or I'm going to at least put an audit on them, and we're going to cut things that Republicans normally would advocate for. Now will you play ball with me? Now will you go on? Because we have a $21 trillion debt. We have interest rates right now, the 10-year Treasury is about 3%. You know what the post-World War II average of the 10-year Treasury is? 5.7%. If that thing goes back to 5.7%, interest on the debt will be $1 trillion a year. And yet, in 2017, we had a record $3.26 trillion in tax revenue. First 4 months of this year, record level. We don't have a revenue problem, we got a spending problem. And I just think it's easier to make the case that we have to, yes, hold back on the public safety net. The last time we had unemployment at 3.9%, we had 17 million people on food stamps. 17 million. Unemployment is now 3.9%. You know how many people on food stamps? 42 million. People have opted out and just said, you know what? This is good enough. I'm not getting in the labor market. We have to make certain, and we tried to do this with the Farm Bill yesterday, to tell those people, tell you what, we're not going to cut your benefits, we don't, but we're going to tell you got to do 20 hours of job training to get the benefits if you don't have a child over the or under the age of 6 at home. You're able-bodied, you don't have a child under the age of 6 at home, you have to do 20 hours of training to get food stamps. Same benefit. Now, it's not just getting mad at people, it's trying to get them a skill so they get back in the labor force. Now, some of you aren't going to agree with me on that, but I bet you would agree or be more willing to listen if I said, oh, by the way, we also got to take a look at the F-35 and why the defense contractor keeps upping up the contract. And that's the way to get to a balanced budget, by being intellectually honest across the board. It's very difficult to do.
All right, Congressman, this is the last question, then we'll have a few minutes for you to close. It's from Blake. One of your soon-to-be-signed bills, or one soon-to-be-signed bill into law, H.R. 1809, juvenile justice reform, has been able to demonstrate your abilities to work with those on opposing political views. Can you share your reason for supporting juvenile justice reform and why this is an American issue rather than a partisan issue?
Yeah, because I don't think someone who runs away from school should be thrown in jail. We've got some valid court orders where you have youngsters, a troubled youngster, and they run away from school, and then they tell their parents that they run away from home. There are states, if a judge says you can't do that again, and the child does it anyway, and they violated the valid court order, they put them in jail, and for an indefinite period of time with a hardened criminal. That's dumb. That's not what kids need. You know what that kid needs? He needs to know how to operate a computerized lathe. That's what that kid needs. So in juvenile justice, we lead the world in incarceration. We have 3 crimes mentioned in the Constitution, and there are 4,500 federal criminal statutes. I think in the heart of most prosecutors are trying to do the right thing, but they're human beings. And sometimes they are a bit overzealous. And they can build a resume on putting people away. Let's reserve our very, very costly prison space for the violent, real criminal, and not the first-time nonviolent offender. That's all I'm saying. And Representative Bobby Scott, Democrat from Virginia, was co-sponsor of the juvenile justice bill. I'm telling you, we're this far away. It's passed the House, it's passed the Senate unanimously. We've got to get it to Congress and get it out. And if we can get that one done, we can move on to criminal justice reform, which I also co-sponsor with Bobby. And that would be a real paradigm shift. And by the way, in the Safe Justice Act, the follow-up to that, it's got an endorsement from the NAACP, Families Against Mandatory Minimums, the American Conservative Union, and Freedom Works. Now that's working across the aisle on both sides, and that's what needs to be done. Tony, let me wrap it up with this. Two things. I want to make sure I get to these things. Medicaid. Fastest growing entitlement program. We had 500,000 people on Medicaid in, a million people on Medicaid in Minnesota. 20% of those people are able-bodied childless adults. Now here's the only thing we propose to do about that. Because Medicaid serves a lot of people who need it. And when we talk about reining in these public safety net programs, people are saying you're throwing people out on the street. No, we're trying to make it solvent so the people who really need the program will have it. Under the Affordable Care Act, under a Medicaid expansion state, which Minnesota is, right? You know what we did? We said if you expand to 138% of the poverty line, and you include childless, able-bodied adults, the federal government will match you 90% of the cost. You know what the current match for the disabled, for women with children, for the poor is in Minnesota? 50%. Now think of the perversity of this. Under the Medicaid expansion program, the federal government is matching a childless, able-bodied adult 90% and a disabled person or a poor kid's 50%. So the American Health Care Act, this was a great Medicaid cut. We said, in 2022, we're going to bring 90 to 50. So that those people have the same match. I don't think that's draconian. I think it's reasonable. And in our bill, Medicaid spending went up every year. And yet, because of those, a modicum of savings, we were accused of throwing folks out into a snowbank. I don't think that's right. And we've got to do something where Medicaid isn't going to be around for the people who really need it. Finally, some gentleman, I think, brought up rebuilding in flood zones. Is that you, sir? That is a fantastic point. That is an absolutely fantastic point. The National Flood Insurance Program is broken. Now, there's something economists call the moral hazard. Moral hazard is when you start to encourage behavior you don't want done. And so there's a reason if, for instance, you've got a house and it's worth $30,000 or $300,000, but you have it insured for $400,000, be surprised how many house fires people see when that happens. You don't do that, so they insure for $250. They have deductibles, so people don't induce the moral hazard. That's exactly what we've done with, in some cases, disaster rate, but with the NFIP. We keep rebuilding in the same floodplains year after year, and you and I keep paying for it. And that's got to get handled this fall. And I'm going to be out there looking for reforms on that because you're right. So let me just wrap up and say thank you to all of you. Agree, disagree. And I was sincerely glad to hear so many of you got into the office and seen me. I've met with you. Again, we met with 271 groups in Minnesota. Myself, either in the office or in Washington. We've done, these teletown halls. We've done a number of other, not telephone town halls, but employee town halls. We're trying to meet with as many people as we can. But when you get into this sort of hot rhetoric environment, it's tougher to do these things. And I will say, in our defense, that I can tell you there have been members of the Minnesota delegation who have served that have never done a town hall. But look, I want the communication lines open. I want you to call our office if you have a question or a comment like you, and maybe we can work together on something. We may not go all the way here, but we can do something. All right? And I want that, because I do want to serve all of you. That doesn't mean I'm going to agree with all of you. I was elected because I have a view, a worldview, and I'm going to continue with that worldview. But that doesn't mean you can't compromise. One more quick point on DACA. The essence of compromise. And this is what I sincerely believe. So President Obama says 730,000 kids who were brought in when they're 5 or 6 years old, through no fault of their own, all true, shouldn't be left in limbo. Now the way he did it, I didn't agree with because Congress has immigration authority since 1951, but I get it because we all want to do something for these kids. The President comes in and says 730,000, let's do a fix for $1 million or 1.8 million. But let's make certain it doesn't happen again in 2 years, in 5 years, in 10 years. DACA is a symptom to a larger problem. So he said, I will do 1.8 million if you give me reform on chain migration. So we go to a merit-based system, and yes, I want a wall and border security. Now, there are a lot of conservatives out there that said, no, don't do anything on DACA, don't touch it. And there are a lot of liberals out there that said, no, I don't want a wall, I don't want a reform on chain migration. This is both. This is compromise. That's what the Good Law bill is in many ways. And folks, you're not going to get everything you want. One of the things I've learned is the difference between a politician and a pundit. You don't get everything you want. You go there in the House and serve with 434 other type A personalities. If you think you're going to get everything you want, you better find another line of work. What you do is you try to move the needle in your direction, and you get part of what you want, you say, let's do it. And that's what that compromise was. And I have to say, to be perfectly honest with you, Chuck Schumer wouldn't go along with it. I think the DACA thing ought to be settled. But it can't just be fixing a symptom. Got to fix the problem. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Ramsey.